Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to take another minute or so just to make sure everybody has the opportunity to get logged on before we go ahead and get started today. Okay, looks like a few more people are rolling in, but yeah, we'll get the webinar kicked off and get started here. Thanks again for joining us. Today's webinar is Inventory and Asset Management with Dynamics 365 Field Service. My name is Mackenzie Lautz, and I'm on the marketing team here at Velosio. I wanted to welcome you and kick off today's events with a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, everyone is currently muted, but we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the questions pane and I'll pass those over to the presenters at the end of the session. This session also is being recorded and you'll receive a copy of it along with other resources following today's event. Again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to our presenters, Dave and Bill.
Thanks, Mackenzie, for the introduction. As Mackenzie mentioned, we're going to talk about inventory and asset management with Dynamics 365 Field Service. This is part three of a three-part series. So hopefully this is the third time you're joining us. So the agenda today, we're going to do an introduction, have discussion points, customer story with a problem statement, customer story with a solution, outcomes, and then Bill will follow up with a demo. Here's a poll question that Mackenzie will post into the chat. Feel free to answer it.
All right, should be popped up there. Yeah, so the question here is, what are your biggest challenges in managing assets? Please select the one that you most identify with, and then we'll kind of analyze those results.
That's good. Thanks, Mackenzie.
Looks like some are coming through.
Okay, good.
Location seems to be the biggest problem so far, and then also visibility in plan services for the required asset.
Oh, good. So those are some topics we're going to talk about today. Um, I moved on to the introduction slide. Can everybody still see? Mackenzie, can you
Here,
still
let
see
me
my slide?
close that poll.
Okay. Right.
Might have to
Yep.
reshare. Not seeing you. There we go. Perfect.
Yep. Okay. So the introduction. Hi, my name's Dave Sigler. I'm with Velosio. I'm a consulting manager for Velosio. I'm the field service lead for Velosio. I've got over 26 years of field service experience, going back to where I was a tech on the ground, to where I worked in management, up to business analyst. And then 8 years ago, I made a switch to Dynamics. Um, Configured one myself as a manager and fell in love with it. And story goes on and on. Now here I am today. So, anyways, that's me. Bill, would you like to do an introduction on yourself? You're muted, Bill.
I've got one button, right? Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Malone. I'm a technology specialist with Microsoft focused on Dynamics service and more specifically field service. I've been with Microsoft, it'll be 20 years in February, and I've been working with Dynamics in one way or another for the last 15 years. Today focused as a technology specialist, and I've been working in this role for about 8 years. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Bill. I'm just waiting for my slide to change there. All right. So the discussion points today is how to manage assets and inventory in Dynamics 365. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk about a customer story. This is a story of a client that came to us at Velosio with a problem with tracking and updating assets, and we'll talk through that problem statement. Uh, Talk about the solution we put in place for them, and then what outcomes they had from that. So our customer story problem statement. So a client came to us. They were having a lot of problems with tracking their assets. And it was real time, being able to have real time updates while in the field for their techs. And from my back in my days, it was you'd go to the field, have paperwork, fill it out, get back to the hotel room, and then you would have to upload things to the computer or key things in. And that's the same problem that this client had. So they had no visibility into those real time updates or the ability to update while they're on site. History, visibility. They had no history visibility into what work has been done on an asset and what parts have been replaced, and also measurements like if there's certain like pressure gauges that they had to take measurements on, or knowing the current software version of the asset. They didn't have any traceability into that. Uh, replace Replacement cost. So this is we actually configured a certain field on the asset that tracked the replacement cost of that asset. And later on, were able to take a report that generated all of the activities that have been ever been recorded on an asset, and gave them the ability to see if it was more cost effective to replace an asset than continuing service on that asset. Asset plan maintenance. I saw there was some individuals that marked this as a problem for them. So they had no visibility. They were tracking everything on Excel spreadsheets. They if they had planned PMs, preventive maintenance on asset, they had it on an Excel spreadsheet. If they had situations where they had to do software updates, or they had like a certain part that needed to be replaced on a certain lot of model numbers for an asset, they tracked all that in Excel too. So they didn't have any visibility when they were scheduling their techs to say, hey, while you're out there doing this service, we also need a preventive maintenance, or we also need a way to do the software upgrade while you're on site. So there was lots of double and triple trips out to this asset to finish these things when it could have just been one trip. Um, and then another thing is asset location tracking. And I saw on the poll that was an issue with some of you that are on this call. Uh, with Dynamics, so with this client, they were unable to know exactly where their assets were. Yes, they knew like a certain like address. They can go to an address, but they couldn't if it was a large facility, or if it was a a facility that had multiple buildings. They had no way of knowing where exactly the asset was unless it was a tech that continually went to that site and knew exactly where that asset was. But as some of you will know, assets can move. So well, the nice thing is being able to track that, and they didn't have that visibility. So what did we do for this client? So we brought them into Dynamics 365 and field service, and for the real-time updates, what we did was added the asset information to the mobile app. So on the mobile app, there's a way for the tech to update their work order, but we also gave them the ability to not only update their work order at the time, but update certain information on an asset. Like we're going to say like tracking hours. So while they're on site, they can update the hours. We made it a required field. So every time they went to close out their work order, that hour tracker was needed to be updated. History visibility. We added asset priorities, pro- properties. I'm sorry, properties. So what that is, it's a way to track all these measurements that we talked about earlier, where you can actually track their software version. You can track the certain pressure gauges or certain voltages that you have to collect on assets during your checks. And also just native out of the box, it gives you visibility into all the work orders and all the parts that have been replaced on that asset. Replacement costs. As I mentioned earlier, what we did was we actually added a field to capture that cost, and it was updated from their finance department, so that they kept track of the current cost of that asset, that model type, and it was a way for them to management to go and look at when parts are replaced or if parts are going to be replaced, if it was just more cost effective to replace the asset. Um, and then asset planned maintenance. What we did was we set them up with service agreements, so that they could know exactly when their preventive maintenance were for that asset, or if there was any other planned services like updates for parts or software upgrades. This gave them the ability that when they went to schedule a tech, they could see that there's other activities that are required for that asset. So you could stack services on top of each other. So when the tech goes out that one time to do a repair, you see that the PM is due within the next 3 weeks. Go ahead and stack it on there. Put it on there so they can complete both those tasks at the same time. So you only get one trip. And then asset location tracking. What we ended up doing was configured what's called functional locations within Dynamics. And what's nice about functional location, it shows that facility and you can dictate down to the room level if you wanted to. You could say, this asset is located at this facility, this building, second floor, room 103, if you needed to. So there's different levels you can, and it's configurable by the end user. So what were some of the outcomes of this? So real-time updates, the resources had the ability to access and update the asset information while they're on site. As an org, from the org level, everybody could see the updates real time, as near to real time, but they were able to see changes instead of waiting for that paperwork to come in and the information is keyed into the system. History visibility, um, again, this is an org level. Whenever you go on that asset card, you can see all the activities that have ever been done on that asset. You can start to look at failure trends. If you're starting to look at those properties, you can see like if there's certain values that are starting to trend up or down, you can start seeing that. And then replacement costs, as I mentioned earlier, was a way for management to see and make that decision on when parts are required. Is it more cost effective to replace that asset or not? Asset plan maintenance, as I mentioned earlier, this just gave them full visibility into what's required to be completed on that asset, and gave them the ability to stack scheduling on resources. Asset location, with the functional location, as I mentioned, it just gave them the ability to say, I'm going on site. And this is my first time going on site. I've never been to this location before. Where is this asset? And it gave them the ability to go into the asset record and actually see where it's located at that facility. And now I get to turn it over to Bill to show you some of these cool features that we used to solution these problem statements for our client.
All right, Bill, you should be able to share your screen now for the demo. I think Bill is still on.
Can you hear
Looks
me
like,
now?
yes, yep, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Can you see my shared screen? I had a little hiccup there apparently.
Yep, can see your shared screen. We can see the
Okay,
whole PowerPoint app along with it as well.
oh, this is my OneNote page.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
Okay,
yep.
we got the right thing. So perhaps like you all, I was taking notes as David was speaking. And, my goal was just to capture some of the terms he used and kind of map it to the customer story and the problem statement and the resolutions. Things like where are assets located? How do I update them when I'm the technician working on the asset itself? The types of information I have to capture from that asset as I work. Um, and then things like how do I set up recurring maintenance? What does it look like when you have to track asset cost. Um, he mentioned the term real-time updates so that management could see exactly what's going on in the field, down to the mobile technician level, on the asset itself, and then doing things like tracking trends. Um, so I'm going to kind of cover all of those. And where I'll start is right in the system with a customer. So right now, imagine you're using Dynamics, and I'm looking at my list of customers, and I want to start to sort of peruse some of the information that David talked about. Well, here's Contoso Coffee, and I have their address and several addresses if they exist, right down to a physical location that I can visualize on a map. From a service perspective, I can look at all the things that we've sold them and that they own or that we service. And it can be broken down in a hierarchical level. So from the top level account name, Contoso Coffee, to their physical locations all over the map, and even into the next level, the building level, or really whatever that hierarchy needs to look like for you in order to represent the layout at your customers. And then I can show assets at each level, even situations where there are sub assets. So from a location perspective, breaking down, say, from headquarters to campus to specific building on campus, and as narrow as you have to go down to the asset themselves, including nesting sub-assets. And then if I want to take a look at one of those assets, well, I can just open it from here, and it opens up in an asset card. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about this card, a couple different views and some slides here in a sec, but this is just a diesel generator. I have all the details, how we categorize it, the account which owns it. If there are any nesting of assets, I'd see the top level asset or the asset one level above. It's tied to a product line item that we'd sold them. And then I can see if there are connected devices. So if I'm monitoring this asset with IoT sensors, that brings to bear a whole host of capability where I can monitor and predict failure, maybe even spot issues before a hard down occurs so that I can go repair it. Excuse me. Over here, I have a list of the related work orders, and this history, of course, would build over time as I had more work to be done on that had been done on that asset. So pretty fascinating stuff with the ability to drive down to kind of the hierarchical level that you require, from physical location on the map to the buildings involved to specific rooms within the building down to the asset level. Now let's move on a little bit. I'm going to switch over to pull up a couple of review slides and kind of do some positioning here. For those folks who may not have attended the earlier sessions, this will be a little bit of background regarding the story that so far in the first three webinars. At the end of the day with field service, we're trying to get the right person to the right place where the job is in a particular time slot, and that person has to have the correct skills and certifications to do the work. And they also have to have the right equipment, whether that be tooling or scarce heavy equipment that they have to schedule along with the technician, or spare parts and consumables that will be used in a repair. Now we add to that whole field service picture the notion of, on assets, remote monitoring. So I can, with sensors on assets, I can monitor the asset remotely. And when doing so, I can trace the work history, the temperature readings, the voltage irregulations, whatever might be the specific component that's being monitored, feed that back into field service, and start to begin to build models to predict failure. So predictive maintenance essentially prevents failure before a hard outage occurs. A plant down or a system down, or I've lost my HVAC. There are many places that could generate a signal to ultimately land a work order. And it could be a situation where we've done some marketing and sold something, and that has to be delivered and installed. That would generate a work order. It could be simple support scenarios where a client calls in, they have a problem. That problem can't be resolved over the phone, so we promote that case to a work order, and now it gets routed and dispatched to the proper skilled technician. It could be those IoT scenarios, the sensors monitoring assets to predict failure, or at least let us know when failure occurs. It could be preventive, so asset management over the course of time at periodic intervals in a preventive maintenance scheme. That implies recurring scheduling of work orders as well as recurring billing. And then this bottom scenario, that came to light, really got a light shined on it during the COVID time period. That was a time where very few of us in a business could get out and talk with our customers. And sometimes it was only the technician who was going and dealing with a problem. So that spawned a whole bunch of what can we do to make that experience better for the customer through the only person that can talk to them, the technician. That might be getting more answers, selling them more products, offering them promotions or deals or a service contract, those sorts of things. We've covered each of these in previous sessions, the route from call in to work order, the route from IoT and preventive to work order. And we also talked about the fact that the Microsoft Cloud, delivered through its partners, provides each of the components that are required from a technological perspective to handle these situations. Now, let's think back to the asset itself for a second. I just want to fill in a few more gaps. First, this is another customer asset screenshot. And what I wanted to point out on this customer asset screenshot from another demo instance is this is actually connected to an asset, and it is being fed sensor data, and that sensor data through a predictive model begins to predict failure, or where failures occurred, obviously let you know as soon as possible and generate a work order when a hard outage occurs. So an example of how I can pipe in sensor data through Azure IoT into field service, my people who are using Dynamics can see what's going on at the asset level down to the specific sensor readings that are happening on that asset. Here's another example, just a different asset view. My point in showing you this is that, of course, we monitor all types of assets with Dynamics. Where there's an asset with IoT enabled sensors, we can handle that inflow and assemble a view of the asset, much like you've seen in these last two screens. Even down to the location level. So to the point David made, imagine if you could have that asset in that room that last year was really hard to find. This year you have a complete digital twin looking at the various components in a room or on a factory floor. So from very straightforward field service bound scenarios to very sophisticated digital twin monitoring of everything that's on a site or on a floor or in a room, you don't have to leave the Microsoft Cloud to get there. Now, looking back to our notes, David brought up the notion of inventory. And so in order to kind of paint that picture, let's talk about what happens with a work order. Now, this is just a standard schedule board where I've got many work orders already out there in the technician swim lanes. They're out there being worked on. David mentioned the concept of stacking work orders. That's really straightforward. I mean, those you can add multiple work types to an individual work order, a single work order, Or for each asset that needs to be worked on at a location, create a separate work order. And those can be aligned in linear time fashion on the schedule board, or they can be stacked. There might be a situation where I perform work on an asset, and then it takes 30 minutes to start up that asset to run a test. Well, I might as well slip over and work on the next asset while I have that time in startup, those kinds of scenarios. When you look at the schedule board over here, I've opened up the legend to give you an idea of all the information that's out here on the schedule board. You see little icon indicators in the lower right-hand corner of a work order booking. You see a color indicator in the upper right-hand corner of the work order booking rectangle. The work order booking rectangles themselves are different colors. Well, that's all spelled out over here. Those colored triangles are an indicator of status. In my system here, I have low, normal, urgent, and high. The little icons in the lower right corner are an indicator of the timestamp on that work order. So in this case, there's a little person icon there. That means in progress. This work order is being worked on. If you see a clock, that work order is scheduled, hasn't begun work yet. Or if you see this lighter shade of blue-gray with a check mark, well, those are completed work orders. So a whole bunch of status indicators on this legend. Now, if I take another look at the schedule board, this ties to one of the problems in the customer example, the story that David told. That customer had some difficulties not only in locating assets, but also where the technicians were on the map in relation to where the work was or the next work. It also draws into the conversation a scheduling component. How do I optimize the schedule such that I can minimize travel time for my technicians? They get to the next closest work in a very efficient fashion in terms of routing on the roadways. Look, several indicators on the map. You might notice that there are a couple of blue indicators. That means that a technician is there. Down here, there are a couple of these indicators that they don't have a route to them. If I click on one of those, what I'm seeing there is an unscheduled work order. That's why there's not a route to it. It's not scheduled yet. And when I clicked it, notice that it highlighted that in the list down here in the unscheduled work order panel. So now I could take that and drag it up onto the board and I can get it scheduled. Again, all background from the prior sessions, but it does speak to the point of location, which was a deep problem for this customer. They needed to know where their technicians were. They needed to know that where they were in relation to the assets that they had to work on. And that technology is built in. It locates the technician based on their location on the mobile app, the GPS system on the mobile app. It can locate customer locations, as we saw in the last session, webinar number 2, through geofencing the customer's locations, such that as a technician approaches and maybe is 5 minutes out, I can send the customer a signal via text or via email to say, your technician is 5 minutes out. When that customer crosses the geofence, meaning they're at the customer property, well, now I can set status from traveling to working so that I never have to worry about the technician forgetting to set status so that we can turn on the billing clock if applicable. Now, let's get into kind of the conversation around inventory a little bit. When we looked at a work order, I'll just open up one of these work orders here for us. Remember that work order pulled together several items. It pulled together the booking record. The booking record is actually the timestamp that goes on the schedule board, and that pulls together all the details, the customer that needs help, the asset that needs to be worked upon, all tied to the customer. It also pulls together the technician who has availability and the right inventory on his or her truck, perhaps. The incident type defines the work that needs to be done. So this is where we get our first look at consumable inventory. If I look at an incident type, for example, I can just click it from here and it'll open up. And there we go. The incident type looks like a pretty simple record when I pop it up into a screen here, but what it really does is it defines everything I need as far as that job is concerned. You see that there's a products tab that shows me the products, the inventory that I might consume in doing this type of a repair. If I look at service, then I see the step-by-step service routines that I have to perform. And I also see if there's an inspection that goes along with it. So each of these service steps could have an inspection template. So if you go back to the point David made around asset metrics, if a technician has to go on site and measure things like pressures or voltages or speeds or has to get a general look via a picture perhaps of wear on an item, I can outline that in an inspection and it pushes right through to the technician. So with this little record and those two things, coupled with the characteristics that are required to complete the job, meaning the skills the technician must have, I have everything I need. I have the parts, I have the outline of the service to be done, and I have a circuit board expert who rates at least good because that's a skill required for this job, all in the incident type. Now, when I go to a job and I consume this inventory, let's take a look at what that might entail. So I'm going to pop open the mobile app. Right now I'm looking at Field Service Mobile, and if I go to my homepage from a technician's perspective, my homepage is usually a booking calendar. It shows me the work orders I have to do today. Now, this application experience, the Dynamics Field Service mobile app, is downloadable from your application store on your device, whether it be Apple, iOS, or even Windows, as in this case. There's a mobile app for Dynamics Field Service that's downloadable. So they can go on any mobile phone, tablet, or even PC form factor. Now, when a technician opens up a work order, let's stick with Contoso Coffee, the account we looked at earlier. I can see the place where I can set booking status. So I might change my booking status from in progress to complete when I'm done, what have you. I have customer details, so I can know the customer. And then on the services tab, I have essentially a set of checkboxes that allow me to complete the work required and any associated inspections as I go, and indicate that just by clicking the circle. Similarly, where I need to consume a product, boom, I just click that I consume that product, and that automatically gets taken out of inventory, installed at the customer site, triggers all the inventory replacement situations that might occur on the ERP side on the back end. I can even provide documentation. So here's a spec sheet for the generator that's being worked on here. And if you look down a little further, here's the customer asset. So if I didn't capture the details I needed by outlining it in the inspection records on the tasks in the service tab, well, I can go to the asset itself. And there might be situations where you set up scenarios where the technician is taking notes right on the asset itself. This is often a configurable experience, so there's some configuration done in your deployment project in order to get the right fields or expose the right fields if they already exist, so you can capture the detail you might need in order to fulfill the drive the outcome that you're striving for. The point here is to say the service is outlined, the inventory is taken care of, and if I have to take notes or change things on the asset, well, that's exposed here as well. Now, let me flip back. By the way, in the prior session, we talked about how we move to perhaps taking notes, then pictures or even a video of the work that we did, capturing a customer signature in order to sign off. Now, let's move back here to Dynamics on the desktop for a minute and kind of continue on. So we've looked at so far a recap of scheduling the work. We noted how the assets themselves are tied very specifically to a location related to the customer, and those assets could even be broken down into sub-assets where applicable, and we track the work history of each. We also looked at scenarios where we're monitoring and surfacing data from IoT sensors on those assets in Dynamics. Now, let's flip over to the slides for one more quick discussion. Once you've consumed that inventory, it's important to understand what field service does with that inventory. Now, remember, we've gone on, worked on site, we've consumed some inventory, and we've also consumed some technician time. Well, field service is designed to integrate with your ERP system. Of course, there are first-party integrations. Microsoft integrates it for you in a lot of most situations where field service and Dynamics ERP, so think finance, operations, supply chain management from Dynamics in the cloud. But field service also sets up very elegantly the journals required to record time. So when a technician completes the work on a asset, they mark that the work order is complete, then that time is calculated and it's staged. Then perhaps a service supervisor or operations manager goes in and looks at the work orders done today and approves the time and the inventory consumed. Well, Dynamics then generates a list of journals for the work done that day. These journals are sitting there ready to be pushed over to ERP to tie directly to customer billing for the work done. Similarly, we generate inventory journals. So when a piece of inventory is consumed, that's indicated and in the mobile app, and then of course staged, ready to ship over to ERP in order to decrement in inventory. And as inventory gets decremented, kick off any reorder activity in the ERP. All of that's tracked and ready to go. Field service is designed to integrate with ERP, and it does so very elegantly. And this is kind of the end of the process. Work completed, billing is ready, inventory management is ready to send over to your accounting and supply chain management pieces. Okay, a couple more topics to cover, and I think we will have kind of exhausted much of what David described in the customer story. Let's take a look at warehousing, a concept around inventory movement, of course, but in field service, warehouses are where inventory is stored before it's consumed by the technicians on a job. And as you can see from this list, I have in my sample system just a few warehouses, but the warehouses are buildings. And if I look at a building, I can see related inventory in that warehouse. And of course, each truck or panel van is also treated as a warehouse. And you'll notice over here in navigation that I have the capability of making inventory adjustments and transfers, which means I can trigger inventory such that when it's consumed off of a truck, which to field services point of view is a warehouse, then I might have to move more inventory onto that truck. And so those transfers can occur either manually or in an automated fashion to move inventory amongst these warehouses. And of course, remember the consumption signals when they're used on a job. The final piece I'll cover sort of ties it all together, and that is the notion of metrics. We've looked at a pretty interesting dashboard here of the work that's being done, but that's not really metrics. We know in Dynamics that we can look at list views of data, and those can be filtered. There's this ability to edit the filters on this list in the columns that display. And a common thing to do is to look at work orders that are assigned to you or work orders that are assigned to another department in a list, or maybe during a particular fiscal period. I can chart those, meaning I can pipe them through interesting graphics. If you look at this one, this is by work type, and we do a lot of delivery here. So 11 of these are deliver and install. When I select that part of the pie chart, it narrows this down to just those work orders that are of the type delivery and install. And then I can take this one step further and push it out for Power BI reporting. So from straightforward list filtering through interesting graphics all the way to complete dashboards and Power BI analytics, it's all built in. So in essence, when you think of the customer scenario and their needs to analyze the business, Dynamics is set up for it. And then it also comes with a pretty rich set of out-of-the-box diagnoses. Field service historical analytics is what this one's called. And this tab is a work order summary that shows work orders, open work orders, broken promises, meaning SLA violations, the amounts of time to schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And then various slicers and dicers. Work orders by work type, work orders by incident type. And these are all responsive. So if I look at a particular category, I can click on it, it will adjust any dependent tiles to reflect just the numbers in that category. Similarly, I can look from the perspective of resource utilization. So the average work time per day for across all my resources for the last 3 months is 37.1 hours. That's pretty good in a 40-hour week. I see a 78% utilization rate. I see a very small late arrival rate, and I see a number of other metrics that I can use to manage the business, including territorial analysis by map. If you have a broad scale territory or even a narrow scale territory with several teams at work, down to individual resources. So regardless of what you're trying to measure in your field operations business, from inventory to work performed to billing to performance of the teams, the capability to monitor that might be out of the box. If not, it's some pretty straightforward customizations within Dynamics or Power BI analyses that you build. And with that, let me take a breath. And David, did you see anything that I might have missed there? Something we'd like to.
No, no, I didn't see anything you missed. One thing I did want to talk about is on those dashboards as well. You can report on your customer assets as well. Just to circle back on the customer asset, and one thing that we didn't show was the properties for customer assets. I don't know if you had that set up in your demo or not, but there is a way to create properties, and it could be collecting data on those measurements as we talked about earlier, and those could be as a admin, you could set those up as plain text fields, or you could do numerical, and there's different ways you could set those up. So those are just some points that I wanted to put out there as well. But everything else you touched on. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, you bet.
Awesome. Yeah, lots of great information there. With that, we'll open the floor to any questions that may have come in. So again, just a reminder, you can pop any questions you have either in the question pane or the chat box. But we'll go ahead and get started with the first one that came in. Okay. How would I be able to link asset level documents like manuals to a particular asset model? Oh, Dave, I think you're muted.
I am. I can take that
There we
one.
go.
I Bill was showing you the assets card, the record. On there, there is and I think he talked about it, but there is what's called knowledge-based articles. You can create a knowledge-based article and link it to that asset. And what's nice about it is you can link it to a model type. That way, if a product is created, if you create an asset from a product, it brings that knowledge base in with it too, so that it's linked together. There's also the concept that's Bill brought up about the incident types, where you can actually add knowledge-based articles to those incident types too. So if you have a certain failure type and you know there's a certain troubleshooting for that failure type, you can add it to that failure type.
I can take a quick look at those screens. I don't have any data there. I apologize, but let me show you where that's at.
Yeah, sure.
Going to share my screen again, folks. And I have our Generac diesel generator back up on the screen. And notice right here in the middle of the page that I have a linked article. And also if there was a connected device and I'm reading, I broke this chain, by the way, after my last demo. I took it down, but if I connect it, I begin reading and then I get alert history here. So this one's disconnected. That's why you see an error. And then when I look at relationships, you know, I'm not sure if you want to put documents here because this is a single asset tied to a customer, but the product that was sold is this one. So move it up a level to our product table. And now I define it at a higher level so that everybody that buys this product could access the literature or the documents tied to that product. For most entities in Dynamics, there's an associated documents entity, and that means I can store documents there. Back to David's point earlier about product properties, you know, I can tie properties to the product level, but as in the customer we're talking about today, they also had properties tied to the asset on their site, their own asset that they had purchased. So same concept here, just one step above. We should kind of make decisions. Are these documents things that go with the product so that they go along with in the chain to everybody that gets that product? Or are they specific to the asset the customer purchases? Then I tie those documents or those product properties to the asset the customer purchased. And the entities are there, you just populate them.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, can you do one more thing? Go back to the customer asset. There's one more point I wanted to make on the customer asset.
Okay,
So
coming
on the
through.
customer asset, you could see that pane on the right hand side on the upper side that's cut sub assets. So what's important about that? If there's like any serialized parts that you need to track for that Generac, and you could add a sub asset for that. That way, if say Generac comes out and says they have a recall on this certain part of their Generac system, you can pull those up and find identify all those assets that have that lot number and be able to address them instead of having to go individually go out to each into the field and like identify them while being
Yeah.
in the field. You have a way to track them through the system.
Yeah. Here's another example, David. Different asset, but this customer has a Smart Brew 300. A
Yep,
sub asset is the heat sensor. And if I
correct.
look at if I look at that Smart Brew, uh, once this screen loads, it'll show me that sub asset here.
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Bill. Kenzie, we got any other questions?
No, I don't. It looks like none others have come in. So thanks for that. Thanks for that great answer to the question and pulling up the screens to kind of go a little deeper in detail on that one. But with that, that's all we have today. So again, Dave and Bill, thanks for all that great information. And thank you to everyone for attending. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sending out the recording to this and the previous webinars in this series, along with other resources and upcoming events here at Velosio. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Thank you all.